Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. I never thought I'd be the kind of man who would lose everything twice. First to my own obsession, then to betrayal so deep it rewired my understanding of trust itself. But here I am, 3 years later, finally ready to tell this story. Because maybe, just maybe, it will save someone else from the hell I lived through. My name is Marcus, and I used to believe that numbers never lied. Charts don't deceive. Market patterns don't cheat on you in the middle of the night while you're dreaming of financial freedom. I was wrong about everything. It started innocently enough. Sarah and I had been married for 8 years when I first discovered day trading. We were comfortable. I worked as a software engineer at a mid-sized tech company, she taught 3rd grade, and we lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in Austin with our twin daughters, Emma and Sophie, who were 6 at the time. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. We had date nights, family vacations to the lake, and dreams of maybe upgrading to a bigger house someday. The first trade I ever made was with money I'd saved from overtime work, just $500. I bought shares of a renewable energy company that had been trending upward, held for 3 days, and sold for a $620 profit. $120 in 3 days. I remember staring at my phone screen in the garage, watching those green numbers, feeling something I'd never experienced before. It was like discovering fire. Sarah was happy when I told her about it that evening. She was folding laundry on our bed, and she looked up with that genuine smile that used to light up everything around her. "That's amazing, honey," she said, and I could tell she meant it. "Maybe we can use it for the girls' college funds." But I was already thinking bigger. I was already planning the next trade. The second trade netted me $200, the third $400. By the end of the first month, I'd turned that initial $500 into $2,000, and I felt like I'd unlocked some secret code to wealth that everyone else was too blind or too scared to see. The dopamine rush was intoxicating, better than any drug, better than sex, better than anything I'd ever experienced. Each winning trade felt like validation that I was special, that I was smarter than the average person, that I had figured out something profound about how money worked. I started spending hours after work studying charts, reading trading forums, watching YouTube videos of successful traders flaunting their luxury lifestyles. I subscribed to premium trading services, bought courses, and joined Discord groups where everyone seemed to be making thousands of dollars a day from their laptops. The language became my language. Support and resistance levels, moving averages, RSI indicators, bull flags, bear traps. I dreamed in candlestick patterns. Sarah noticed the change first in small ways. I'd come home from work and immediately disappear into our home office, emerging hours later with bloodshot eyes and a distracted manner. Dinner conversations became one-sided affairs, where she'd tell me about her day or the girls' latest adventures, and I'd nod absently while mentally calculating position sizes and risk-to-reward ratios. "You seem stressed lately," she said one evening, as we were getting ready for bed. She was brushing her hair at the vanity, watching me in the mirror as I sat on the edge of the bed with my laptop balanced on my knees, checking after-hours futures markets. "I'm not stressed," I replied, without looking up. "I'm focused. There's a difference." "The girls ask why Daddy doesn't play with them anymore." That should have been a wake-up call. That should have been the moment I closed the laptop, hugged my wife, and remembered what actually mattered. Instead, I felt a flash of irritation. How could she understand the pressure I was under?
How could she comprehend the opportunities I was pursuing for our family's future? I was working to build something bigger than weekend trips to the park. "I'm doing this for them," I said, finally looking at her reflection. "For all of us. Once I get this figured out, we'll have more time together than we know what to do with." She set down the brush and turned to face me directly. "Marcus, you've been saying that for 3 months. When is once going to happen?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge I didn't want to accept. Because the truth was, I didn't know when once would happen. Every successful trade just raised the stakes for the next one. Every win convinced me that an even bigger win was just around the corner. I was chasing something that kept moving further away even as I got closer to it. By month 6, I'd grown my account to $15,000. By month 8, it was $25,000. I quit my job, actually quit my steady, secure software engineering job to trade full-time. Sarah thought I'd lost my mind, and maybe I had, but I showed her the bank statements, the trading platform screenshots, the steady upward trajectory of our net worth. The numbers spoke for themselves. "This is actually happening," I told her, gripping her hands across our kitchen table while the girls watched cartoons in the living room. "We're gonna be rich, Sarah, really rich. I'm not talking about having a nice house. I'm talking about financial freedom. Private schools for the girls, vacations to Europe, early retirement, everything we've ever dreamed about." She wanted to believe me. I could see it in her eyes, the way she searched my face for certainty, for some sign that I knew what I was doing. And for a moment, surrounded by the familiar warmth of our kitchen with coffee brewing and our daughter's laughter drifting in from the next room, it felt like I did know what I was doing. It felt like I was the hero of my own success story. "But what if something goes wrong?" she asked quietly. "Nothing's going to go wrong," I said, with the confidence of someone who had never experienced a real loss. "I have systems now, rules, risk management. This isn't gambling, it's calculated speculation based on technical analysis and market psychology." The words sounded so professional, so intelligent. I'd learned the language of successful trading, and speaking it made me feel like I belonged in that world of wealth and sophistication. But languages can be deceptive. You can speak fluently about something you don't truly understand. The first major loss came in month 10. A biotech stock I'd put 30% of my account into, a company developing what seemed like a revolutionary cancer treatment, failed a crucial FDA trial. The stock gapped down 47% at market open, and I watched helplessly as $8,000 of our money evaporated in the first 30 minutes of trading. I should have taken the loss and moved on. Every trading book I'd read, every course I'd taken, every successful trader I'd followed emphasized the importance of cutting losses quickly. But something primal kicked in, a desperate need to be right, to prove that my analysis hadn't been wrong, just early. I held the position, convinced that the market had overreacted, that cooler heads would prevail and the stock would recover. It didn't recover. It continued falling for 3 straight weeks until the company declared bankruptcy, and my $8,000 loss became a total loss. $12,000 gone. Money we'd saved for years, money that represented security and future plans and trust, just vanished into the abstract machinery of the market. I didn't tell Sarah about the loss immediately. I couldn't bear to see the disappointment in her eyes. Couldn't handle the conversations about getting my old job back. Couldn't admit that maybe this whole venture had been a mistake. Instead, I doubled down. I convinced myself that this was just a temporary setback, a learning experience that would make me a better trader. I started taking bigger risks, making more aggressive plays, trying to win back what I'd lost as quickly as possible. The revenge trading phase was brutal. Every loss made me more desperate to recover, and desperation led to increasingly irrational decisions. I'd buy stocks that were already up 20% for the day, hoping to catch another 10% move. I'd hold losing positions far longer than I should have, watching them bleed away our savings 1 percentage point at a time. I'd make emotional trades based on tips from strangers on the internet, abandoning all the careful analysis that had made me successful in the beginning. Sarah knew something was wrong. She'd find me at 3 in the morning, hunched over my computer in the dark office, the blue glow of trading charts reflecting off my face like some kind of digital campfire.
She'd see the stress lines that had appeared seemingly overnight, the way I'd snap at the girls when they interrupted my trading, the way I'd stopped eating regular meals because I was too focused on the next potential opportunity. "How much have we made this month?" she asked one evening in late November, and I could tell from her tone that she already suspected the answer. "It's been a challenging month," I said, not meeting her eyes. "The market's been volatile, but December should be better. There's usually a year-end rally." That's not what I asked. I finally looked at her, and I saw something that scared me more than any losing trade ever had. I saw doubt. Not just doubt about my trading abilities or our financial situation, but doubt about me as a person. Doubt about my judgment, my honesty, my priorities. For the first time since we'd met in college, my wife was looking at me like I was a stranger. "We're down for the month," I admitted quietly. "How much down?" The question hung between us like a judgment. Outside, our neighbors were putting up Christmas lights, and I could hear Emma and Sophie playing some elaborate game involving superheroes and imaginary villains. Normal family sounds, normal life happening all around us while our world slowly cracked apart. 6,000. She was quiet for a long time, just staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Finally, she said, "Marcus, that's more than I make in 3 months." I know, and I'm going to get it back. I've been studying new strategies, and I think I understand where I went wrong. January is historically a strong month for the market, and I have some positions that are going to be really profitable if— "Stop."
She held up her hand, and something in her voice made me fall silent immediately. "Just stop with the explanations and the projections and the if this happens, then that will happen scenarios. I need you to hear what I'm about to say." I nodded, though part of me was already thinking about the pre-market futures and whether I should set any overnight positions. "I'm scared," she said simply. "I'm scared of what you've become. I'm scared of what this is doing to our family. The girls barely see you anymore, and when they do, you're distracted and irritable. We don't talk about anything except trading and money and market volatility. You quit your job without really discussing it with me, and now we're burning through our savings while you chase some fantasy of getting rich quick." "It's not a fantasy," I protested. "People make millions trading. Look at all the successful traders on social media. Look at the hedge funds. Look at us." Her voice cracked, and I realized she was crying. "Look at what we've become. Look at what you've become." That night, lying in bed next to Sarah while she slept, I made a promise to myself that I would get our money back. Not just the money we'd lost, but enough to prove that this whole journey had been worth it. Enough to show Sarah that her faith in me hadn't been misplaced, that I really was the man she'd married, just temporarily distracted by the pursuit of something bigger. I had no idea that while I was lying there planning my financial comeback, my wife was lying awake too, planning something else entirely. Something that would make my trading losses seem trivial by comparison. The market, as it turns out, wasn't the only thing in my life that was about to crash. December was supposed to be my redemption month. I'd spent hours researching new strategies, back-testing trading systems, and convincing myself that I'd finally learned the lessons the market had been trying to teach me. I had a new approach, more conservative position sizes, tighter stop losses, a focus on high-probability setups rather than home-run swings. I was going to be disciplined. I was going to be patient. I was going to win back everything we'd lost, and then some. For the first 2 weeks, it actually worked. Small, consistent gains started rebuilding my confidence and our account balance. Nothing spectacular, just steady progress that felt sustainable and professional. I made $300 on Monday, $400 on Tuesday, $500 on Wednesday. By Friday of the second week, I was up $2,000 for the month and feeling like I'd finally figured out the secret to consistent profitability. Sarah noticed the change in my mood immediately. I started joining the family for dinner again, helping Emma and Sophie with their homework, even suggesting we drive around the neighborhood to look at Christmas lights, something the old, pre-trading Marcus would have done without thinking. "You seem happier," Sarah said, as we were wrapping presents late one evening. The girls were finally asleep, and we'd spread out on the living room floor with scissors and tape and rolls of colorful paper. It felt almost normal, almost like the life we'd had before I'd discovered the intoxicating world of day trading. "I am happier," I told her. And it was true. The constant anxiety that had been my companion for months had lifted. I was sleeping better, eating regular meals, actually listening when people talked to me. "I think I finally got this figured out." She smiled, but it was a careful smile. "I'm glad. The girls have missed you." "I've missed them too." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "I know this year has been hard. I know I've been difficult to live with. But it's going to be different now." That was December 15th. On December 16th, everything changed. The day started like any other winning day had started. I was up early, reviewing pre-market news and planning my trades, feeling confident and controlled. The market opened smoothly, and my first trade of the day, a swing position in a renewable energy ETF, was immediately profitable. By lunch, I was up $400 and feeling like my new, disciplined approach was exactly what I had needed all along. Then, at 2:15 p.m. Eastern Time, the Federal Reserve released an unexpected statement about interest rate policy that sent shockwaves through the entire market. Within minutes, the major indices were down 3% and falling fast. Individual stocks were getting crushed, and the renewable energy sector, where I had not just one, but 5 separate trades running, was getting hit especially hard. I watched in horror as my account balance plummeted. $400 in profit became $200 in loss, then $1,000, then $2,000. The momentum was building like an avalanche, and every second I hesitated to cut my losses, the losses got bigger. This was exactly the kind of scenario my new risk management rules were designed to handle. I should have closed all positions immediately, taken the loss, and preserved what remained of our account. But something primal took over. The same desperation that had driven my revenge trading phase earlier, magnified by the fact that I'd been so close to proving I could do this successfully. Instead of cutting losses, I doubled down. I used our remaining cash to buy more shares of everything that was falling, convincing myself that this was just temporary panic and that when cooler heads prevailed, I'd be positioned perfectly for the bounce back. The bounce never came. Not that day, not the next day, not the day after that. By December 20th, our trading account had a balance of $317. $17,000 of our family's money gone. Not lost on one dramatic trade, but bled away slowly over a week of stubborn hope and increasingly desperate attempts to will the market back in my favor. I sat in my office that evening, staring at the nearly empty account, trying to figure out how to tell Sarah that not only had I not recovered our earlier losses, but I'd lost almost everything we had. The Christmas presents were already wrapped and under the tree. The girls were excited about winter break starting the next day. Sarah had made dinner reservations for our anniversary on December 22nd. How do you tell your wife that you've gambled away your family's financial security 2 days before Christmas? The answer is, you don't. Not immediately. First, you lie to yourself that you can fix it somehow. You research emergency loan options, consider borrowing against your 401k, wonder if there's any way to get your old job back quickly enough to paper over the disaster you've created. You spend hours calculating how long you can keep up the pretense that everything is fine, how many bills you can pay with credit cards, whether there's any scenario where Sarah never has to know how completely you failed as a husband and provider. But financial reality has a way of making itself known, especially when you're already behind on the mortgage payment and the credit cards are maxed out from previous temporary trading setbacks that were supposed to be recovered quickly. On December 22nd, our anniversary, Sarah found the overdue notices I'd been hiding. I came home from a desperate day of trying to day trade our last few $100s into something meaningful to find her sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of mail spread out in front of her. Bills marked final notice, credit card statements showing balances I'd been too ashamed to mention, bank statements revealing just how dire our financial situation had become. "Marcus," she said quietly, without looking up, "we need to talk." The girls were at Sarah's mother's house for a sleepover, which meant we were alone for what I knew was going to be the most difficult conversation of our marriage. I sat down across from her, looking at the evidence of my failure spread across the table like an indictment. "I can explain," I started, but she held up her hand. "How much is left?" "In the trading account?" "In all our accounts. How much money do we have left total?" I did the math in my head, including checking and savings, and the few $100s remaining in the trading account. About $1,200. She closed her eyes and was quiet for a long time. When she opened them again, there was something different in her expression, something final. "We're going to lose the house." "No, we're not. I'm going to figure this out. I can get another job. We can refinance. We can—" "Marcus, listen to me." Her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. "We are 3 months behind on the mortgage. Our credit cards are maxed out. We have $1,200 to our name and 2 children who need food and clothing and stability. This isn't a temporary setback that you can trade your way out of. This is a catastrophe." The word hit me like a physical blow. Catastrophe. That's what I had created through my obsession with making us wealthy. I had turned our comfortable, stable life into a catastrophe. "I know I've made mistakes," I said desperately. "I know I got too aggressive, too greedy, but I can learn from this. I can be more careful. If you just give me another chance." "Another chance with what money?" She gestured at the bill spread between us. "There is no money left, Marcus. You've lost everything." That night, Sarah told me she wanted a separation. Not immediately. We couldn't afford for either of us to move out, but she needed space to think about whether our marriage could survive what I had done to our family. She slept in the guest room, and I lay awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand how I had destroyed everything that mattered to me in pursuit of something that had only existed in my imagination. The next morning was Christmas Eve, and we had to pretend everything was fine for the girls. We made pancakes and watched holiday movies and exchanged presents, and Emma and Sophie were so happy and excited that it was almost possible to forget the disaster lurking just beneath the surface of our family life. Almost. But that afternoon, while I was outside teaching the girls how to build a snowman in our front yard, something happened that would change everything again. Sarah came outside to watch us play, and she was talking on her phone. I could hear only fragments of the conversation, but the tone was different from her usual calls with friends or family. More intimate, more secretive. "I know, but we can't rush this," I heard her say. "The timing has to be right." I looked over at her, and she quickly ended the call, shoving the phone into her pocket with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Who was that?" I asked casually, helping Sophie pack snow for the snowman's middle section. "Oh, just work stuff. Nothing important." But it didn't sound like nothing important. It sounded like someone who was being very careful about what they said and when they said it. Over the next few days, I noticed other small things. Sarah spending more time on her phone, usually in private, going out for longer periods to run errands that used to take half the time, being vague about her schedule and plans in ways that felt deliberately evasive. Under normal circumstances, I might have dismissed these observations as paranoia or guilt-driven suspicion. After all, I had just devastated our marriage with my trading obsession. Wasn't it natural that Sarah might need some privacy to process everything that had happened? But these weren't normal circumstances. I was desperate, broken, and hypersensitive to any sign that things might be even worse than I had imagined. So I started paying closer attention. On December 29th, Sarah said she was going grocery shopping and would be back in an hour. 3 hours later, she still wasn't home, and she wasn't answering her phone. When she finally returned, she had one small bag of groceries and an elaborate story about running into an old friend and losing track of time. That night, I did something I'd never imagined myself capable of. I looked through her phone. I waited until she was in the shower, then quickly scrolled through her recent calls and messages. Most were normal, conversations with her mother, texts with other teachers from her school, the usual mundane exchanges that make up daily life.
But there was one contact that caught my attention. David, financial advisor. David wasn't our financial advisor. We'd never had a financial advisor. So who was David, and why was Sarah talking to him at all hours of the day and night? I clicked on the message thread and felt the world tilt sideways. The messages went back months, all the way to September, right around the time my trading losses had started getting serious. At first, they seemed professional enough. David offering advice about managing finances during difficult times, Sarah asking questions about debt consolidation and asset protection. But as I scrolled through the conversation, the tone gradually shifted, became more personal, more intimate. "I can't stop thinking about you," read one message from Sarah, sent just 3 days earlier. "When this is all over, we can finally be together," David had replied. "I just need to get through the divorce proceedings first. Marcus has no idea what's coming." I dropped the phone like it was on fire. My wife wasn't just planning to leave me because of the financial disaster I'd created. She was planning to leave me for another man, a financial advisor named David, who had apparently been offering her more than just professional guidance while I was busy destroying our family savings. The affair had been going on for months. All those times she'd been patient with my trading obsession, supportive of my dreams, worried about our financial future. She'd been secretly building an exit strategy with someone else. Suddenly, her calm reaction to our financial catastrophe made sense. Her measured response to losing almost everything we'd worked for. She'd already moved on emotionally. She was just waiting for the right moment to move on practically. I sat on the edge of our bed, holding her phone with trembling hands, reading through months of messages that revealed a completely different version of my wife. A version who was capable of deception on a scale that made my trading losses seem almost quaint by comparison. "I know you're struggling with guilt," David had written in one message, "but remember that you deserve to be happy. You deserve to be with someone who puts you first." "Sometimes I feel like I'm living a lie," Sarah had replied, "but then I think about our future together, and it gives me strength to get through each day." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. While I had been torturing myself with guilt over losing our money, convinced that I was the worst husband and father in the world, Sarah had been conducting an emotional affair with another man and planning our divorce like a business transaction. But the worst part wasn't the affair itself. The worst part was realizing that my trading obsession, devastating as it had been, might not have been the real problem at all. Maybe Sarah had been looking for a way out long before I'd made my first trade. Maybe my financial failures had just given her the perfect excuse to do what she'd already decided to do. The shower was still running. Sarah was still in there, probably thinking about David, maybe even texting her from the waterproof phone case I'd bought her for Christmas last year. Meanwhile, I was sitting here holding the evidence of her betrayal, feeling like everything I thought I knew about my life had been a carefully constructed illusion. In that moment, something crystallized inside me. I had lost our money, yes. I had been obsessed and distracted and a poor husband in many ways. But I had never stopped loving Sarah. I had never betrayed her trust or made plans to abandon our family. Every trade I'd made, every risk I'd taken had been motivated by a genuine desire to build something better for the people I loved. What Sarah had done was different. What Sarah had done was calculating and deliberate and cruel in ways that went far beyond financial irresponsibility. The shower turned off. I quickly put her phone back where I'd found it and pretended to be getting ready for bed. When Sarah came out of the bathroom, wrapped in the terry cloth robe I'd given her for Mother's Day 3 years ago, she smiled at me with the same warm expression she'd been wearing for months while secretly planning to destroy our marriage. "Good night, honey," she said, kissing my forehead before getting into bed beside me. "Good night," I replied, and settled in for what I knew would be a sleepless night of planning my own strategy. If Sarah thought she could manipulate our financial crisis to her advantage, she was about to discover that she wasn't the only one capable of strategic thinking. I had spent months learning hard lessons about risk and reward, about timing and patience, about the difference between being right and being profitable. It was time to apply those lessons to something more important than trading. I spent the next week pretending I knew nothing about Sarah's affair while carefully documenting everything I could find. Screenshots of text messages, records of phone calls, credit card statements showing charges at restaurants and hotels where she'd claimed to be running errands or attending work functions. The evidence painted a clear picture of a relationship that had been developing for months while I'd been consumed with trading. David Martinez turned out to be a financial advisor with a small firm across town. 42 years old, divorced, no children. He specialized in helping people navigate complex financial situations during life transitions, like divorce proceedings. According to his LinkedIn profile, he had a particular expertise in asset protection and wealth preservation strategies for high net worth individuals going through marital dissolution. The irony was almost funny. While I'd been trying to build wealth through trading, my wife had been getting advice on how to protect assets I didn't even know we still had from a man she was sleeping with. Because that's what I discovered when I dug deeper into our financial records. Sarah hadn't just been passive about our money troubles, she'd been actively moving assets. Her teacher's retirement account, which I'd assumed was untouchable, had been rolled over into an IRA that David's firm managed. The small inheritance she'd received from her grandmother last spring had been deposited into a separate account I'd never known existed. Even some of our joint savings had been gradually transferred into accounts with only her name on them. While I'd been hemorrhaging money in the stock market, Sarah had been quietly building her own portfolio under the guidance of her lover. She'd been preparing for our divorce while I'd been destroying the very foundation she was planning to escape from. The realization was devastating and liberating at the same time. Devastating because it meant our marriage had been over long before I'd made my first trade. Liberating because it meant I didn't have to carry all the guilt for our family's destruction. On January 7th, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called David's office and scheduled an appointment. "I'd like to discuss my financial situation," I told his secretary. "My wife, Sarah Martinez, has been working with Mr. Martinez, and she recommended I speak with him about some investment strategies." It was a small lie. Sarah's maiden name was Martinez, though she'd taken my last name when we married. But it was enough to get me a meeting, and that's all I needed. David's office was exactly what I'd expected. Tasteful but not ostentatious, with diplomas and certifications covering one wall and a view of downtown Austin from the window behind his desk. He was younger than I'd imagined, with the kind of casual confidence that comes from success in a profession where success is measured in other people's money. "Mr. Thompson," he said, standing to shake my hand as I entered his office. "It's nice to meet you."
But I smiled and took his outstretched hand. "Thank you for making time to see me, Mr. Martinez. I understand you've been helping Sarah navigate some complex financial decisions." Something flickered in his eyes. Uncertainty, maybe even a hint of fear. He was wondering how much I knew, how much Sarah had told me about their relationship, whether this meeting was what it appeared to be or something else entirely. "Please, call me David," he said, gesturing for me to take a seat across from his desk. "Sarah mentioned that you've had some challenging experiences with day trading recently." "That's one way to put it," I said. "I've made some mistakes that have put our family in a difficult financial position. Sarah suggested that someone with your expertise might be able to help us explore our options." David nodded sympathetically, and I could see him relaxing slightly. This was familiar territory for him, helping families deal with the aftermath of financial disasters. He pulled out a legal pad and pen, settling into his professional role. "Why don't you start by giving me an overview of your current situation?" he said. "Assets, liabilities, income, expenses, whatever information you're comfortable sharing." For the next 20 minutes, I laid out the complete picture of our financial catastrophe. The trading losses, the maxed out credit cards, the behind mortgage payments, the exhausted savings accounts. I was thorough and honest, and I could see David taking notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, building a comprehensive understanding of just how thoroughly I'd destroyed our family's financial security. "This is obviously a very challenging situation," he said when I finished, "but it's not hopeless. There are strategies we can implement to help you and Sarah protect what assets remain and begin rebuilding your financial foundation.
"That's reassuring," I said. "Sarah mentioned that you'd already been helping her with some preliminary planning." Another flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "Yes, well, she reached out several months ago when she first became concerned about the direction things were heading. We've discussed some basic asset protection strategies, but nothing has been implemented yet." I nodded thoughtfully. "She showed me some of the accounts you helped her set up. Very impressive work." This was a lie. Sarah hadn't shown me anything, but David's reaction told me everything I needed to know. His face went pale, and he set down his pen with hands that were suddenly less steady. "I think there might be some misunderstanding," he said carefully. "The work I've done with Sarah has been strictly preliminary, exploratory discussions about potential strategies, nothing more." "Of course," I said with a smile that I didn't feel. "But I have to ask, is it standard practice in your industry to conduct such extensive preliminary work with a client's spouse without the other spouse's knowledge?" The silence that followed was deafening. David stared at me across his desk, and I could see him trying to calculate how much trouble he was in, how much I actually knew, what his best move might be. "Mr. Thompson," he said finally, "I think we need to clarify the nature of my professional relationship with your wife." "Oh, I think it's already quite clear," I replied. "What I'm curious about is whether your firm's compliance department knows about the personal relationship you've developed with a client whose assets you're managing, or whether your professional liability insurance covers romantic entanglements with married women whose husbands haven't consented to the asset transfers you facilitated." David's face went from pale to gray. In the financial advice industry, ethics violations weren't just career-ending. They could result in regulatory sanctions, lawsuits, and even criminal charges, depending on the specifics of what had occurred. "I want you to understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "that Sarah came to me for help during a very difficult time in her marriage. My intentions were purely professional initially." "Initially," I repeated, "but not subsequently." "What do you want from me?" It was the question I'd been waiting for, the moment when desperation and guilt would make him willing to negotiate rather than fight. "I want you to help me understand exactly what assets my wife has moved and where they've been moved to. I want copies of all account statements, transaction records, and any documentation related to the financial advice you've provided. And I want you to explain to me how a marriage counseling session with my wife turned into an intimate relationship that's been going on for 4 months. I never meant for things to develop the way they did," he said. "Sarah was vulnerable, and she needed someone who understood the financial complexities of her situation. Her situation being married to a man who was losing money while she was secretly moving assets out of his reach." David looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. "The asset protection strategies were Sarah's idea. She was concerned about protecting the family's remaining resources from further trading losses. By moving them into accounts that only she could access, the accounts are structured to protect assets while still being considered marital property subject to equitable division in the event of divorce proceedings." There it was, the admission I'd been looking for. Sarah and David hadn't just been having an affair. They'd been actively planning for our divorce while I'd been struggling to save our marriage. "So you've been providing advice on divorce proceedings as well as asset management," I said. "Despite the fact that I'm still married to your client and have never consented to or even been informed about any of these strategies. Mr. Thompson, I think you should speak with an attorney before this conversation goes any further." "I think you're right," I agreed, standing to leave. "But first, let me ask you one more question. How much of our marriage do you think was real? And how much was Sarah just waiting for the right opportunity to execute her exit strategy?" David didn't answer, but the expression on his face told me everything I needed to know. Sarah's unhappiness hadn't started with my trading obsession. It had been building for years, and my financial disasters had simply provided her with the perfect cover story for abandoning our family. I left his office with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Yes, I had made catastrophic mistakes with our money. Yes, I had been obsessed and distracted and a poor husband in many ways. But I hadn't been the only one destroying our marriage. The difference was that my destruction had been visible and dramatic, while Sarah's had been calculated and hidden. That evening, I sat in my office, the same office where I'd lost our family's financial security, and planned my next move with the same methodical approach I should have used for trading. I researched divorce attorneys, documented every piece of evidence I'd gathered about Sarah's affair and asset transfers, and began building a strategy for protecting whatever remained of my relationship with Emma and Sophie. Because that's what this had always really been about. Not the money, not the trading, not even the betrayal. It was about my daughters, and making sure that Sarah's carefully orchestrated exit strategy didn't destroy their lives the way my trading obsession had damaged mine. The confrontation came 3 days later. I was in the kitchen making breakfast for the girls when Sarah came downstairs, already dressed for work, checking her phone with the secretive smile I'd learned to recognize. "Good morning," she said, kissing my cheek with the same casual affection she'd been performing for months. "Morning," I replied, flipping pancakes while Emma and Sophie argued about whether syrup or honey was better. "Sarah, we need to talk tonight after the girls go to bed." Something in my tone made her look up from her phone. "Is everything okay?" "We'll discuss it tonight." The day felt endless. Sarah texted me twice asking if everything was all right, and both times I replied that we'd talk when she got home. I spent the afternoon playing with Emma and Sophie, helping them build a fort in the living room, reading stories, being present in a way I hadn't been for months. If this was going to be one of our last days as a family, I wanted it to be a good one. After dinner, after baths and bedtime stories and final requests for water and one more hug, Sarah and I finally sat down in our living room. She curled up on one end of the couch, and I sat on the other, with what felt like miles of space between us. "So, what did you want to talk about?" she asked, and I could hear the forced casualness in her voice. Instead of answering, I handed her a folder containing printed screenshots of her text messages with David, records of the asset transfers, and a summary of my conversation at his office 3 days earlier. She opened the folder, and I watched the color drain from her face as she realized what she was looking at. "Marcus, I can explain." "Can you?" I interrupted. "Can you explain how you've been conducting an affair for 4 months while I've been torturing myself with guilt over our financial situation? Can you explain how you've been secretly moving our assets while letting me believe we were on the verge of bankruptcy? Can you explain how you've been planning our divorce while pretending to support my efforts to save our marriage?" She was quiet for a long time, staring at the evidence spread across her lap. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "You want to know the truth?" she said. "The real truth? I think I deserve that much. The truth is that our marriage was over long before you started trading. The truth is that I've been unhappy for years, but I stayed because of the girls, because of financial security, because leaving seemed too complicated and too scary. The trading losses didn't destroy our marriage, Marcus. They just gave me permission to admit that it was already destroyed." The words hit me like physical blows, but there was also something almost relieving about finally hearing the truth after months of confusion and self-blame. "So David was what? Your exit strategy?" "David was someone who understood me, someone who listened when I talked, who made me feel valued and appreciated and desired. Everything you stopped doing years ago." "I stopped doing those things because I was working 60 hours a week to support our family. I stopped doing those things because I was stressed about money and our future and trying to build something better for all of us." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You stopped doing those things because you stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as just another responsibility, just another item on your endless list of things to manage and optimize and improve." The accusation stung because there was truth in it. I had become distant over the years, focused on practical matters, treating our relationship like a business partnership rather than a romance. But that didn't justify what she'd done. So instead of talking to me about it, instead of suggesting counseling or trying to work on our marriage, you decided to have an affair and steal our assets? "I didn't steal anything," she said angrily. "I protected what I could from your trading addiction. I made sure that when everything collapsed, which we both knew it was going to, there would be something left for the girls." For the girls or for you and David? She was quiet again, and I could see her calculating how much to admit, how much she could still deny. "Both," she said finally. "I was trying to protect all of us from the disaster you were creating." By creating an even bigger disaster? By taking control of a situation that was completely out of control. We stared at each other across the couch, across the wreckage of our marriage, across years of accumulated resentments and disappointments and failures to communicate. And for the first time in months, I felt something like peace. Not happiness. There was nothing happy about this moment, but clarity. The terrible, liberating clarity of finally understanding that some things are broken beyond repair, and the only healthy response is to stop trying to fix them and start figuring out how to move forward. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we get divorced," she said simply. "We divide whatever assets remain, we figure out custody arrangements for the girls, and we try to build separate lives that make us both happier than we've been together." "And David?" She looked down at her hands. "David and I will see what develops once this is all finalized." I nodded slowly. "There's something you should know. I spoke with the divorce attorney yesterday." Her head snapped up. "What did you tell them?" "Everything. About the affair, about the asset transfers, about David's potential ethics violations. My lawyer thinks we have grounds for a very favorable settlement, especially regarding custody." The blood drained from Sarah's face again. "Marcus, you can't use the girls as weapons. They need both their parents." "You should have thought about that before you started planning your exit strategy with your boyfriend," I said. "But you're right. They do need both their parents. Which is why I'm going to make you an offer." She waited, and I could see her bracing herself for whatever ultimatum I was about to deliver. "Full disclosure about all the assets you've moved, including complete control over the accounts David helped you set up. Fair division of everything that remains, with the girls' college funds held in trust accounts that neither of us can touch. Shared custody, but I get primary residence since you're the one who chose to blow up our family. And if I don't agree? Then we go to court, and I present evidence of your affair and financial misconduct to a judge who will be very interested to learn about your relationship with the financial advisor who helped you hide marital assets. Texas is still a fault divorce state, Sarah. Adultery matters here." She was quiet for a long time, and I could see her weighing her options, calculating the risks of fighting versus the costs of accepting my terms. "I need time to think," she said finally. "You have until Friday." "That's only 3 days." "You've had 4 months to plan your strategy. I think 3 days is generous." That night, Sarah slept in the guest room again, but this time it wasn't a temporary arrangement born of anger and disappointment. It was the beginning of the end of our marriage, and we both knew it. Over the next 3 days, I watched my wife cycle through the stages of grief for our relationship. Denial about how much evidence I had, anger about my ultimatum, bargaining about the terms of custody and asset division, depression about the impact on Emma and Sophie, and finally, acceptance that this was really happening. On Friday evening, she found me in my office, the same office where I'd lost our family's savings, where I'd discovered her affair, where I'd planned my counterattack against her betrayal. "I accept your terms," she said quietly. I looked up from the laptop where I'd been researching job opportunities in my old field of software engineering. "All of them?" "All of them." I nodded and closed the laptop. "I'll call my attorney on Monday and have the papers drawn up." "Marcus," she said as I stood to leave the office, "for what it's worth, I am sorry. About the lying, about the sneaking around, about the way this all happened. I know that doesn't change anything." I stopped at the doorway and looked back at her. She was sitting in the chair I'd occupied during those long months of obsessive trading, looking small and sad and somehow younger than her 34 years. "I'm sorry too," I said. "About the trading, about becoming someone you couldn't love anymore, about failing as a husband and father. I know my apology doesn't change anything either." "Do you think we ever had a chance?" she asked. "If you hadn't started trading, if I hadn't met David, if we'd handled things differently?" It was a question I'd been asking myself for weeks, and I finally had an answer. "I think we had chances," I said, "lots of them. But we both chose to pursue individual solutions to our problems instead of working together to solve them. I chose the market, you chose David, and our marriage became collateral damage." She nodded slowly. "The girls are going to hate us." "No," I said firmly. "They're going to be confused and hurt and angry, but they're not going to hate us, because we're going to make sure this divorce is about ending our marriage, not about destroying their family. They're going to have two parents who love them, even if those parents can't live together anymore." "You really think we can do that, after everything that's happened?" I considered the question seriously. Could we co-parent successfully after betrayal and financial disaster and the complete breakdown of trust? "I think we have to," I said, "because the alternative is letting our failure as spouses destroy our ability to be good parents, and that's not acceptable." 6 months later, our divorce was finalized. I moved into a small apartment across town, got a job with a tech startup at 70% of my previous salary, and began the slow process of rebuilding my credit and my life. Sarah kept the house and started over with David, who had somehow managed to avoid any professional consequences from his relationship with a client. Emma and Sophie split their time between us, adjusting to their new reality with the resilience that children somehow always manage to find. They were confused at first, then sad, then gradually accepting of the fact that sometimes parents who love their children very much can't figure out how to love each other. The trading addiction took longer to overcome than I'd expected. Even after losing almost everything, I found myself drawn back to the charts and the forums and the promise of quick wealth. I joined a support group for trading addicts, went to therapy, and slowly learned to channel my competitive instincts into career advancement rather than market speculation. I never made millions trading. I never achieved the financial freedom I dreamed about, but I learned something more valuable, that security doesn't come from making perfect trades or finding the ideal partner or protecting yourself from every possible loss. Security comes from being honest about your failures, taking responsibility for your choices, and building a life based on what you can control rather than what you hope to gain. 2 years after our divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected phone call from David Martinez. "Marcus, I know this is strange, but I need to talk to you about Sarah." I was in my apartment, helping Emma with her math homework while Sophie practiced violin in the next room. It was one of my custody weekends, and we'd fallen into comfortable routines that felt almost normal now. The divorce had been difficult, but we'd all survived it, and Emma and Sophie were thriving with their new arrangement. "What about Sarah?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "She's missing." The words didn't make sense initially. Missing? How does someone with a stable job and a house and a live-in boyfriend just go missing? "Missing how?" I asked, muting the television so I could focus on the conversation. "She didn't come home from work 3 days ago. She's not answering her phone, her car is gone, and she cleaned out our joint bank account before she disappeared." I felt a familiar twist in my stomach, the same sensation I'd experienced when watching a bad trade spiral out of control. "Have you called the police?" "I filed a missing person report yesterday, but they're treating it like a voluntary disappearance because of the money. They think she just decided to leave." "Did she?" There was a long pause. "I don't know. Maybe. Things between us have been complicated lately." Emma looked up from her homework, sensing the change in my tone. I smiled and mouthed "work call" to reassure her, then stepped into the kitchen for privacy. "What kind of complications?" "Financial problems. She's been gambling online, poker, day trading, cryptocurrency speculation. She lost a lot of money, and when I confronted her about it, she accused me of being controlling and hypocritical." The irony was breathtaking. Sarah, who had left me because of my trading addiction, had developed her own obsession with financial speculation. The woman who had accused me of destroying our family through reckless gambling had done exactly the same thing to her new relationship. How much money are we talking about? Nearly everything, our savings, her retirement account, even money she borrowed against the house. When I discovered what she'd been doing and tried to intervene, she said I didn't understand the opportunity she was pursuing. She said she was going to make us wealthy. I closed my eyes and leaned against the kitchen counter. It was like listening to a recording of myself from 3 years ago, full of justifications and promises and absolute certainty about opportunities that existed only in the imagination of someone addicted to the rush of financial speculation. David, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Sarah isn't missing in the way you're thinking. She's running. Running from what? From the consequences of what she's done. From the shame of losing your money the same way I lost ours. From having to admit that she became the very thing she left me for being. But where would she go, and why wouldn't she tell me? Because telling you would mean confessing that everything she criticized me for, everything she used to justify our divorce, she's guilty of herself. Running away is easier than facing that level of hypocrisy. I could hear David breathing on the other end of the line, processing this interpretation of Sarah's disappearance. The police said they'd investigate more thoroughly if family members expressed concern, he said finally. Would you be willing to contact them? For the sake of Emma and Sophie? That evening, after the girls were asleep, I called the detective handling Sarah's case. Officer Rebecca Chen was professional but clearly skeptical about the urgency of the situation. Mr. Thompson, based on our investigation, your ex-wife appears to have left voluntarily. She withdrew money from her accounts, packed clothing, and left no signs of distress or struggle. These are not the actions of someone who's been kidnapped or harmed. Officer Chen, I understand why it looks that way, but I think there's more to this situation. Sarah has been struggling with gambling addiction, and people in that situation often make impulsive decisions that seem rational to them but appear completely irrational to everyone else. Mr. Martinez mentioned the financial losses, but adults are free to make poor financial decisions, and they're free to leave relationships when those decisions create problems. What about her daughters? Sarah would never voluntarily abandon Emma and Sophie. Whatever she's done, wherever she's gone, she's planning to come back for them. This seemed to get Chen's attention. She has children? Twin 7-year-old daughters who spend half their time with her and half with me. She missed her scheduled custody weekend, which is completely unlike her. Sarah has many flaws, but she's never been anything but devoted to Emma and Sophie. I could hear Chen taking notes. When was she supposed to have the children? Last weekend. She was supposed to pick them up Friday evening and return them to me Sunday night. When she didn't show up Friday, I assumed there was some miscommunication. By Saturday morning, I was worried. By Sunday, I was calling David to find out what was happening. And this behavior is unusual for her? Completely unprecedented. Sarah has missed exactly 0 scheduled custody exchanges in 2 years. She's never even been late without calling. Chen was quiet for a moment, and I could sense her reevaluating the situation. A woman abandoning her romantic partner might be understandable. A mother abandoning her children suggested something more serious. Mr. Thompson, I'm going to need you to provide a detailed timeline of your ex-wife's recent behavior. Any changes in her routine, any communications you've had with her over the past few weeks. Can you come in tomorrow morning? I spent that night going through my phone records, email exchanges, and text messages with Sarah, looking for clues about her state of mind or potential destination. What I found was a gradual progression from normal co-parenting communications to increasingly erratic behavior over the past 2 months. In early October, her messages had been normal: logistics about school events, schedule changes, discussions about the girls' activities. But by November, there were signs of stress. She'd asked to switch custody weekends several times, citing work obligations that seemed vague and poorly defined. She'd been late dropping off Emma and Sophie on multiple occasions, usually with elaborate apologies and promises that it wouldn't happen again. Most telling were the financial requests. In mid-November, Sarah had asked if I could cover the girls' gymnastics fees because she was having some temporary cash flow issues. 2 weeks later, she'd asked for help with their school lunch accounts. By December, she was requesting advanced child support payments to help with unexpected expenses.
I should have recognized the pattern.
I should have seen the signs of someone spiraling into the same financial obsession that had destroyed our marriage. But I'd been focused on my own recovery, my own career rebuilding, my own efforts to be a better father than I'd been a husband. The next morning, I met with Detective Chen and provided everything I'd gathered. She listened patiently, taking notes and asking clarifying questions about Sarah's personality, her relationship with the girls, her previous behavior patterns. Based on what you're telling me and what Mr. Martinez has shared about the financial situation, I'm inclined to treat this as a voluntary disappearance with concerning circumstances, she said. We'll issue a bolo for her vehicle and check with local casinos, hotels, and other places someone in her situation might go. What about her phone? Can you trace her location? We've tried. The phone has been turned off since the day she disappeared. Either the battery died or she disabled it intentionally. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened a trading platform and started researching Sarah's potential moves. Not to trade, but to think like someone consumed by financial speculation. If I were Sarah, facing massive losses and mounting shame, convinced that one more big win could fix everything, where would I go? Las Vegas was the obvious answer. But Sarah was smarter than that, and she knew that's where everyone would expect her to go. No, she'd choose somewhere less obvious but equally accessible to someone with a gambling problem. I called David back. Has Sarah ever mentioned Oklahoma? Oklahoma? Why would you ask that? Because Oklahoma has more casinos per capita than almost any other state, but they're not tourist destinations like Vegas or Atlantic City. They're local gambling centers that cater to regional players rather than vacation gamblers. Someone trying to avoid detection while pursuing serious gambling might choose a place like that. She did mention driving through Oklahoma once when she was visiting her college roommate in Dallas last year. Said she stopped at a casino on the way back and won $500 playing poker. Which casino? I don't remember the name, but she said it was huge and luxurious and made her feel like a high roller, even though she was just playing small stakes. I spent the next hour researching major casinos in Oklahoma, looking for properties that matched Sarah's description. WinStar World Casino, just across the Texas border, was the largest casino in the United States. It would definitely feel luxurious and overwhelming to someone unaccustomed to serious gambling environments. I called Detective Chen and shared my theory. Mr. Thompson, I appreciate your input, but we can't send officers to Oklahoma based on speculation about where your ex-wife might have decided to gamble. Then let me go look for her. That's not advisable. If Mrs. Martinez is indeed gambling compulsively, confronting her could escalate the situation unpredictably. Officer Chen, with respect, I know what it's like to be in Sarah's mental state right now. I know the desperation, the shame, the absolute certainty that the next bet will fix everything. If she's spiraling the way I think she is, she needs help, not law enforcement. That evening, I arranged for my mother to watch Emma and Sophie for the weekend, told them I had to go out of town for work, and drove to Oklahoma. WinStar World Casino was exactly as advertised, a massive, overwhelming complex that stretched for what seemed like miles. The parking lot was full of cars from Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, and surrounding states. Inside, the casino floor was a maze of slot machines, table games, and poker rooms that could easily swallow someone for days without anyone noticing their presence. I started with the poker room, figuring that's where Sarah would most likely be based on her previous experience. The room was enormous, with dozens of tables running everything from low-limit Texas Hold'em to high-stakes tournaments. I'm looking for my ex-wife, I told the poker room manager, showing him a photo of Sarah on my phone. She may be in some kind of crisis and her family is worried about her. He looked at the photo carefully, then shook his head. I don't recognize her, but we have players coming and going constantly. She could have been here without me noticing. I showed the photo to dealers, waitresses, and other staff members throughout the casino. Most shook their heads politely, but a few thought Sarah looked familiar. Finally, a cocktail waitress in the high-limit slots area studied the photo carefully. Yeah, I think I've seen her. Brunette, about this tall, playing the $100 slots. She's been here for the past couple of days, pretty much living at machine number 47. Machine 47 was in a secluded corner of the high-limit area, away from the main traffic flow. As I approached, I could see someone sitting at the machine, feeding bills into the slot repeatedly with mechanical precision. It was Sarah. She looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was wearing the same clothes she'd apparently been wearing for days. Her eyes were fixed on the slot machine screen with the same obsessive focus I remembered from my own trading addiction. I stood behind her for several minutes, watching her play. She was betting the maximum on every spin, $500 per pull. Win or lose, she immediately pressed the button for another spin. I calculated that she was going through approximately $15,000 per hour at her current pace. "Sarah!" She spun around in her chair, and her face cycled through surprise, fear, and anger in rapid succession. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for you. Emma and Sophie are worried. David filed a missing person report." "I'm not missing. I'm right here." "You're missing from your life. How long has it been since you slept, since you ate a real meal?" She turned back to the machine without answering and fed another $100 bill into the slot. "Sarah, talk to me. How much have you lost?" "I haven't lost anything," she said, hitting the spin button. "I'm down temporarily, but I'm going to win it back. I've been studying the patterns on this machine, and I think I figured out the algorithm." The delusion was heartbreaking and familiar.
She sounded exactly like I had during my worst days of trading addiction, convinced that I had discovered some secret system that would allow me to beat mathematical odds. "There is no algorithm," I said gently. "Slot machines are random number generators. Every spin is independent of every other spin." "You don't understand," she said, feeding another bill into the machine. "This machine is due for a big payout. It hasn't hit the jackpot in hours." I sat down at the empty machine next to her, and for the first time in our conversation, she looked at me directly. "Sarah, I need you to hear what I'm about to say. You are exactly where I was 3 years ago. The same desperation, the same certainty that you can win back everything you've lost, the same belief that you've discovered something no one else understands. I know because I lived it." "This is different," she said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. "How much did you start with when you got here?" She was quiet for a long moment. "12,000. "And how much do you have left?" Another pause. "About 800. In 3 days, she had lost over 90% of the money she'd stolen from her relationship with David. At her current pace, she'd be completely broke within the hour. "Sarah, look at me." I waited until she turned away from the machine completely. "When you wake up tomorrow morning, you're going to be sick with shame and regret. You're going to hate yourself for what you've done. You're going to wonder how someone who criticized me for gambling addiction could have done the exact same thing." Tears started forming in her eyes. "But that shame is not going to help Emma and Sophie. That regret is not going to repair your relationship with David. The only thing that might help is stopping right now, walking away from that machine, and figuring out how to rebuild your life." "I can't," she whispered. "I've lost too much. If I don't win it back, I'll lose everything." "You've already lost everything. The only question now is whether you're going to lose your daughters too." That broke through whatever psychological barrier had been keeping her locked to the slot machine. She covered her face with her hands and started sobbing, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere primal and desperate. I moved to the chair next to her and put my arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into me the way she used to when we were married and facing problems together instead of separately. "How did this happen to me?" she asked through her tears. "How did I become everything I hated about what you did to us?" "Because addiction doesn't care about intelligence or moral superiority or good intentions," I said. "Because the same brain chemistry that drove my trading obsession is driving your gambling obsession. Because we're both people who want to control outcomes that can't be controlled." We sat there in the high-limit slots area of a casino in Oklahoma. Two divorced people who had destroyed their marriage through financial obsession, holding each other while surrounded by the sounds of slot machines and the desperation of other people chasing the same impossible dreams we'd been pursuing. "What do I do now?" she asked finally. "Now, you cash out whatever's left, we check you out of whatever hotel you've been staying at, and we drive back to Texas.
You call David and tell him you're safe, you call the girls and tell them you love them, and then you figure out how to get help. David's going to leave me. Maybe, or maybe he'll understand that people sometimes get sick in ways that make them do things they never thought they'd do. Either way, you can't control his reaction. You can only control your next decision. Sarah cashed out her remaining credits, $740, and we walked out of the casino together. In the parking lot, she handed me her car keys. I don't think I should drive right now. The trip back to Texas took 4 hours, and we spent most of it talking about addiction, recovery, shame, and the strange ways that life sometimes forces you to confront the worst aspects of yourself. By the time we reached Austin, Sarah had developed a plan. Inpatient treatment for gambling addiction, honest disclosure to David about the extent of her losses, and a gradual return to normal custody arrangements with Emma and Sophie. David was waiting at Sarah's house when we arrived. He looked exhausted and relieved and angry all at the same time. "Where have you been?" he demanded as Sarah got out of my car. "Getting a very expensive education about myself," she replied. "David, we need to talk." I drove home to my apartment where my mother was helping Emma and Sophie with their Sunday night routines. They ran to hug me when I walked in, and I held them tighter than usual, grateful for the reminder of what actually matters in life. "Daddy, where'd you go?" Sophie asked. "I had to help your mom with something," I said. "She's okay, and she'll see you next weekend as scheduled." 3 months later, Sarah completed her treatment program and began the slow process of rebuilding her relationship with David, her career, and, most importantly, her role as Emma and Sophie's mother. David ultimately decided to stay with her, understanding that addiction was an illness rather than a moral failing. Sarah and I developed a different kind of relationship than we'd had during our marriage or even during our divorce proceedings. We became co-parents who had survived similar addictions, people who understood each other's struggles in ways that few other people could. Not romantic partners, not even close friends, but allies in the shared project of raising 2 daughters who deserved better than the chaos we'd created through our individual obsessions with financial speculation. The girls never learned the full details of what had happened that weekend in Oklahoma. They knew their mom had been having some personal problems and had gotten help, and that their dad had been there to support her through a difficult time. In some ways, it was the most honest and productive thing Sarah and I had done together since the early years of our marriage. As for me, I never returned to day trading. The experience of watching Sarah spiral into the same addiction that had destroyed our marriage was enough to cure me permanently of any desire to risk financial security on market speculation. I focused on my career, my relationship with Emma and Sophie, and building the kind of stable, predictable life that actually supports the people you love.
Sometimes, late at night when the girls are asleep and my apartment is quiet, I think about the 3 years that nearly destroyed everything I cared about. The trading losses, the betrayal, the divorce, the discovery that Sarah was capable of the same destructive obsessions I'd been guilty of. It's tempting to wonder what would have happened if I'd never made that first trade, if Sarah had never met David, if we'd found some way to address our marital problems before they became catastrophic. But I've learned that addiction recovery requires accepting responsibility for your choices, rather than fantasizing about alternative histories. I chose to gamble with our family's financial security. Sarah chose to have an affair and hide assets. We both chose individual solutions over collaborative problem solving, and we both paid the price for those choices. The difference between where we are now and where we were 3 years ago is that we've both accepted responsibility for our failures and committed to different patterns of behavior. We've both learned that security comes from making good daily decisions rather than pursuing dramatic windfalls. And we've both discovered that the most important investment you can make is in the people who depend on you, not in the markets or opportunities that promise to make you wealthy. If you've made it this far, I'd love to hear from you what moment in your life made you see someone for who they truly were. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Reddit Whispers, where the real stories get told.